between risking almost certain death and asking a stranger for help, what would you choose? The math should be simple on that, but I would have to think about it for a minute because I don't like asking for help. Anybody else? Anybody okay with asking for help? I really want to ask, I should ask this beforehand, but I want to ask Perna and Dipti and maybe Lingling too. Maybe this is an American thing that asking for help is such a big problem. We don't like to ask for help. And I've done some dumb things because I didn't want to ask for help. I've nearly killed myself not asking for help before, like cutting down trees that I should not have cut down alone. We bought these inflatables because we were going to have this inflatable rental business, which please don't ever do that. Don't ever do that. But I bought them for these people. And if you roll them up right and you store them correctly, they're managed. And you have the right equipment, it's manageable. Otherwise, it's not manageable at all. And I went to go pick them up, and they had not stored them correctly. I didn't have the right equipment, and I went to go pick them up, and they're in this giant metal container. It's July. It's so hot. I'm by myself in the woods, and I go to move these. And I'm not going to ask for help, of course. And I go to move these, probably 600-700 pound inflatables by myself. And it is not working. And I'm there hours and move them inches, okay? And there was a point that I'm laying in this container, so on my back, hurting, haven't made any progress at all. It's getting close to dark. Like, I don't know what to do. And I finally break down and call my dad and ask for help. And if you're going to ask somebody for help, it should be your dad that you can ask for help, right? It should be. He wasn't that far away, and he was thrilled to help. As thrilled as my dad gets, he was thrilled to have the opportunity to help me. That's the only way dads know how to show affection, is by helping you, right? That's the only way we got. He was pumped to help me, but I would do anything, including hurt myself permanently, to avoid asking for help. We don't want to ask for help. And when he got there, you know what? We moved it easily, no problem. But I didn't want to ask for help. If you say to me, would you rather risk almost certain death or ask a stranger for help? Obviously, you ask a stranger for help. But if you put me in the actual situation and see what I actually do, I generally lean towards the almost certain death situation, right? Because I don't want to ask for help. And that's what makes today's story so difficult for me. We're going through the story, the life of Elijah. Now, Elisha is the capital P prophet of the Old Testament. He is the one that's held up as the prophet, which is kind of weird if you go through it just as an American Christian or as a Gentile believer going through this, because you read it, it's like there's not that much about him. In fact, other people did bigger miracles. Other people had more amazing things. Other people have more chapters of the Bible. But for Jewish readers of the Old Testament, they hold him up as the guy. And there's some reasons they hold him up as the guy. And it's not just about what happened in the actual Bible, but the stories they have about him outside of the Bible. In the Bible, God does amazing miracles through him. God stops the rain for 3.5 years. He brings a kid back to life. He defeats 450 prophets of Baal. But the big thing is that he doesn't die. God sends a fire tornado. It's more dignified in the Bible. It says that it's a fiery whirlwind, which sounds like fire tornado to me. But he sends a fiery whirlwind and takes him to heaven. And they look for his body for days and they never find it because he doesn't die. He's translated. God just gets him and takes him. And so because he doesn't die, they never find his body. There's all these stories that pop up about him, not Bible, mythology, that pop up about him showing up to help people. He shows up to rescue a kid lost in a well, or he shows up to help a woman who's being taken advantage of by a group of shady businessmen. He does all these things. And I really think, my personal belief, that God finds these stories hilarious because he gives this prophecy. The last verse of the Old Testament, God says, oh, hey, by the way, Elijah's coming back. He's going to come back, and he's going to be the forerunner of the Messiah. And he comes back through John the Baptist. John the Baptist comes back, and he looks like Elijah, and he does the same thing kind of things Elijah does, and he comes back through the person of Elijah. And so he becomes this, not just this biblical hero, but this folk hero as well through all these other things, which is I would really love to see the transfiguration whenever Jesus goes up on the mountain and he's glorified, and Moses and Elijah both come back, and Peter, James, and John are taking a nap on the mountain. They wake up, and their childhood hero is standing there, the guy that never died that they have all these stories about, and they're in the middle of it right then. I would love to see that because of all the things built into that. But they got all these stories about Elijah and about how great he is, and he's this amazing man. But James, the pastor of the church at Jerusalem, the brother of Jesus, writes about these things. And he says, Elijah did these amazing things, of course. But he did them through the power of God. It wasn't because he was special. It was because he had faith. He says the prayers of any righteous person, the prayers of any faithful person can accomplish amazing things, the same kind of things. It's not about him. It's about his faith. And when we go back through the life of Elijah, what we see is a man of faith, but a man of problems, just like us. So as we go through this story, I want to take you through his life to see the simple faith, but also the problems that came from his life, which are the same kind of problems that we deal with. And we're not to those problems yet. We're at the very beginning. Last week, what happened is Elijah shows up out of nowhere. And what we know about Elijah is that he is a redneck. He's a country bumpkin. From the construction of his name, we know that he is a guy that was landless. He was a migrant worker who went from place to place with his family, working from place to place. They did not have their own land. Most likely it was because they're on the border regions that get traded back and forth between Israel and the nations around them as they fight back and forth. So he was a migrant worker that comes from nowhere. They identify him by his clothes. There's a story later on where he's not really even in the story. They just kind of talk about him in the story. And one person says to another person that this guy came and told me this thing. And they said, what do he look like? He's like, well, he was wearing hairy clothes and he was wearing a leather belt and he looked kind of crazy. Like, oh, that's Elijah. Like he dresses so different. They know who he is on sight. He's just different. He doesn't come from a noble family. He doesn't come from the priestly line. He's not somebody with gravitas or power or anything about him. He just shows up and he confronts the king of Israel, who's a powerful king, who's an evil king. If he's the capital P prophet, then this king is the capital E evil king, Ahab. And he says, because of your evil, because of the idolatry, and it's not just idolatry, it's cult prostitution, it's the sacrifice of children in fire to worship these other gods. Because of that, God is going to stop the rain for 3.5 years. It doesn't say 3.5 years, but until I say it's going to stop, it works out to 3.5 years. And he shows up and confronts this king, and then God takes him out in the wilderness where the drought is affecting everybody else, but he still provides for him for that time. And that's where we introduce him. But where we show up is right at the end of that time, and Elijah has another challenge. The first challenge is confront an evil king who might put you to death and see if I'll take care of you. And the next challenge, for me, would be more challenging. And that is, ask a stranger for help. In 1 Kings chapter 17, starting in verse 7, says this: after a while, the brook was dried up because there was no rain in the land. You know, that whole drought that Elijah brought on everybody else starts to affect him too. And you can just get this image of him sitting there under the shade tree, the only place where there's still water. He's still got some food because of the way that God's taking care of him. And he wakes up one morning and notices that the stream is a little lower than it was the day before. And then the next day, it's a little lower than it was the day before. And you start to get this panicky feeling because you thought you were good, right? Because God, you obeyed God, you confronted the evil king, you didn't get killed, you hightailed it out of town, you're back to a place where you can be alone, you can be taken care of, and you've got the stream when nobody else has any water, but now your source of provision is starting to run out. And eventually, a couple of days or a week later, after you've spent a few anxious days wondering what's going to happen, the water that was your salvation is gone. And God doesn't say anything about it until the water is gone. And Elijah has to wonder, what comes next? And after the water is gone, verse 8, thank you, the word of the Lord came to him, arise, go to Zarephath, which belongs to Sidon, and dwell there. Behold, I have commanded a widow there to feed you. Now, we don't know anything, like most of us don't know anything about ancient Israeli geography, right? So if you say this, you're like, those are just words that go right over my head. But let me tell you about something about this, because this is important, okay? You don't need to know where Zarephath is. What you need to know is that he's telling him to go to another country. So you've got the southern kingdom of Judah, which is where Jerusalem is. Then you got the northern kingdom of Israel, which is where Elijah lives. This is where you can't see this side of my hand. I don't know why. I think you can. You got over here, this is where Samaria is. This is where King Ahab rules. And then up north of here is the kingdom of Tyre and Sidon. If you remember from history, Alexander conquered this island called Tyre, and he conquered it by building a land bridge across through the Mediterranean over to this island kingdom called Tyre. He built this bridge over and then conquered this place that had never been conquered before. This is that same kingdom. That land bridge is still there today. But it was Tyre and Sidon, and they had all kinds of problems with the nation of Tyre and Sidon. For all of their history, God was always angry at this because it was the home of the worship of Baal. And this is one of the few times in history, though, that Israel and Sidon were getting along because they had a political alliance. Because the high priest of Baal in Sidon, his daughter was named Jezebel. And Jezebel was married to Ahab. And they were getting along for the first time ever. Really never got along, but for right now, they're getting along. And the reason that Elijah had called down a drought was to punish Israel, but to punish them for siding with Sidon and worshiping Sidon's god, Baal. So the punishment was not just on Israel, but it was on them as well. And so he says, hey, I want you to go to another country. And any other time, this might be protection, where he says, I want you to flee the place where they're hunting you. Because as we read on through the rest of the story, what we find out is that King Ahab is hunting Elijah. He figures that he can either torture him to make him stop the drought, or he can kill him and make the drought go away, but he's hunting for him and can't find him. But now what God wants him to do is travel 100 miles across hostile territory to go into another nation, which might in other times have been safety for him, but right now is not safety for him because they hate him as much as Israel hates him right now. And at least in Israel, he can kind of blend in with his accent being the same and his language being the same. And maybe there are people in Israel that would still honor a prophet of God, but in Sidon, they don't. So God says, I know I've protected you in the wilderness here, but now what I want you to do is go into the only place where they might hate you more, and the only place that you might be more recognizable than you are right here. And that's how I'm going to protect you. That's how I'm going to take care of you, is taking you to a place where you will be in more danger than you are right here and right now. And the way that you're going to be taken care of is you're going to take somebody at the bottom of the social structure, the only class of person who has no ability to work, no ability to take care of herself, much less you, and she is going to provide for you. There were protections for widows in Israelite society. God had built protections in for widows and poor people. There are protections like, first of all, you can't oppress them legally. You can't oppress them. They have legal protections in the law when they go to court, things like that. They have legal protections about property, but they also have protections about provision. So when you harvest, you're not allowed to harvest the corners of your property because you're not allowed to harvest the corners of the field because those corners are set aside for the widows to come in and harvest so that they have some food. If you forget some food, you're not allowed to go back and get it because that's to be left behind for the widows and the orphans. When you're harvesting olives or you're harvesting grapes, you're only allowed to harvest that once. You're not allowed to go back through and check for more because that's to be left behind. And God built in these protections for widows and orphans and the poor. That only exists there. It doesn't exist in Sidon. So a widow in Israel is at the bottom of society. She can't work, she can't do anything, but she still has protection. A widow in Sidon is even below a widow in Israel. But God says, I want you to go to someone who's even below socially in her ability to provide. The widow's where you are right now. And this is the means that I'm going to use to provide for you. A place where you're instantly recognizable, even more than you are right now in your weird clothes. A place where the people are going to oppose you, not just because you're a foreigner, but because of your religion. And a place where a woman is going to struggle to provide for herself, much less to take care of you. And you're going to have to walk 100 miles through hostile territory to do it. This is not the assignment I want from God. But the stream is dry. The ravens are no longer bringing food. And so Elijah gets up and he walks for a week, maybe a week and a half, depending on how many times he has to hide from the soldiers that are hunting him, how many villages he has to go around to avoid the people that are looking for him. And he crosses through hostile territory into a nation where he's never been, a place that's not going to fit within the religious ritual requirements that he's supposed to meet, to go to a town where he's never been, to ask a woman who has almost nothing to take care of him during a drought. Verse 10. So he arose and went to Zarephath. I put too many verses on there. To Zarephath, and when he came to the gate of the city, behold, a widow was there gathering sticks. And he called to her and said, bring me a little water in a vessel that I may drink. And as she was going to bring it, he called to her and said, bring me a morsel of bread in your hand. And she said, as the Lord your God lives, I have nothing baked, only a handful of flour in a jar and a little oil in a jug. And now I'm gathering a couple of sticks that I may go in and prepare it for myself and my son, that we may also eat it and die. Because you have picked a worse person to ask for food. Let's just talk about widows for a minute. Let's talk about women in this society for a minute. The woman's day is going to start this way. A woman is going to get up, and unless she's a really wealthy woman who has servants to do this for her, she's going to get up, and the first job of the day is going to be to go get water. Okay, they don't have water in the house, so you're going to go to the well, you're going to go to the stream, you're going to go to the river, and you're going to get all the water you need from the day. And so that's probably going to be multiple trips, because it's not about the size of the container, it's about what you can carry. So you're going to go get water for the day, you're going to bring it in, you're going to start the fire for the day, and then you're going to cook whatever you're going to cook for the day, and that's how the day is going to proceed. If you are a widow, the way it's going to work is you're going to go and you're going to get water and you're going to bring it back, and from that point, you're going to scavenge for food. If you're a fortunate widow, you might be doing some laundry for a man who doesn't have a wife or servants to take care of it. You might be doing some things like that. You might be forced in some less nice professions if you're in really hard times. But most widows are just going to be scavengers. So they're going to go out, they're going to get water, they're going to bring it back in, and then they're going to be out in the local area. They're going to look for mushrooms. Maybe they're going to try to trap some animals if they're able to do something like that. They're going to look for things that they can sell, things that they can make, things that they're going to trade. The problem is that they're in a drought. So there's no animals. All the stuff has been picked over. The other problem is that in this area, this whole area right here, specifically the city of Zarephath, has been dug out by archaeologists. There's a big archaeological dig that was done in the 50s, and you can read about all this stuff if that has any interest to you. But you can see some of the things, and they did water rationing in this area. So the way the water rationing would work is they did it by social structure. So the priests and the political leaders got to go first. Their servants would go out first and get water. And then the wealthy businessmen, they would go out and they would get water. And then the free people would go out and get water. And then the servants and slaves, they would get to get water. And at the bottom were the widows that had nothing. They would go get water. So what happens is this woman goes out and she waits until everybody else gets water, and then she goes and gets the last bit of muddy water for her and her son, and gets whatever she can get, if there's anything left. And she brings it back, and then she goes out to forage, except there's nothing left. because they've been foraging for a while and nothing is growing. So at this point, she's just looking for sticks. So she's looking for sticks, and this guy wanders up. And he starts off asking for something to drink. He says, "Can I just have some water?" Which is a pretty big request in a drought anyway, right? It's not food, but it's water. "Can I have some water?" And she says, okay, he's going to go get it. Now there's a question like, why would she share the water? And we're not given an answer why would she share this water. I think it's just because as a woman alone, there's no police. She doesn't have any family to take care of her. My assumption is she just doesn't want any trouble for this smelly, foreign, strange man. Like, it's easier just to give up a cup of water than to have trouble from this guy who will do who knows what to her if she doesn't just get him to leave her alone. So she says, okay, whatever. We don't have much water, but we're about to die anyway, so I'm just going to go back to the house and get you a cup of water. Normally, a normal day, she would be able to go to the stream, she would go to the well, she would get him some water, no big deal. But she's going to share the meager portion of muddy water that she and her son have just to get this guy to leave her alone, because you don't want any trouble. And he says, as she's walking away, bring me some bread too, while you're at it. Now, you know I like to read things into this, and I'm trying to figure out why he doesn't just say this. And I personally think he's just having a hard time with what God is asking him to do. Because God said, I've commanded this woman to take care of you. Go over there and ask her for food. And I don't like asking for help anyway. And you want me to ask for help from this poor woman in the middle of a drought? And so it's like, I can ease my way into this. I'm just going to ask for some water. And she's walking away. He's like, oh, God. Could you bring some bread too? You know, that's how I'd have to do it. I couldn't look at her. Can I have some bread too? And God has not told him anything except go here, and I've provided a woman that's going to take care of you. Go. And she said, as the Lord your God lives, I have nothing baked, only a handful of flour in a jar and a little oil in a jug. And now I'm gathering a couple of sticks that I may go in and prepare it for myself and my son that we may eat it and die. I don't have anything. And there's some people that read this and they say the reference to the Lord your God, and she does use God's name Yahweh here as oh, she's a secret believer. And that's what some of the Jews believe when they look at that. She's a secret believer. And that's why there's none of that in the text. There's nothing to indicate here that she was a believer in the God of Israel. There's nothing to indicate that here. She is a woman who does not want trouble. She can tell he's from Israel by the way he dresses, by the way he talks. She doesn't want trouble from this guy. And there's no reason for them to not believe that the God of Israel also existed. They believed other gods existed. They had their gods, other people had their gods. She just acknowledged it existed. It's like I know that Canada has a prime minister. He's not mine. I know he's there. I acknowledge that he exists. I just don't care, right? He's just over there. He's not mine. I don't care. And she says, look, as sure as you have a God, I have no food. She's respectful because she doesn't want this crazy guy to cause her any trouble. This guy who wanders up out of the desert in the middle of a drought and asks her, of all people, for food and water. Just please leave me alone. I'm just trying to fix some food and die. Her prayer at this point is not even for more food. Her prayer is probably just that she dies first so she doesn't have to watch her son die. This woman just wants to be left alone. She says, please just let me get my sticks. I'll give you the water. Just leave me alone. And in verse 13, there's a change in the way that Elijah speaks. And the reason there's a change is because God speaks to him. God didn't tell him anything. He just said, hey, go ask that widow for help. Okay. But once he takes the step of obedience, and this is the way it works most of the time, once he takes the step of obedience, God reveals the other side of this. God Elijah said to her, do not fear. Go and do as you've said, but first make me a little cake of it and bring it to me. And afterwards make something for yourself and your son. For thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, he just spoke this to me. The jar of flour shall not be spent, and the jug of oil shall not be empty until the day that the Lord sends rain upon the earth. So the way that this is structured, and this is a grammatical Hebrew nerd thing, the first, God didn't tell him what was going to happen until he made the request, and then God said, okay, now that you stepped out in faith, I know you're nervous about this. I love to watch it when you're nervous. Now that I've put you in this position, say this. This is a test of your faith. If you will give what you have, I will provide the rest. Don't be afraid. The God of Israel promises that if you will give a little bit of what you have as an act of faith, then you will have everything you need until this difficulty is over. This is a pattern that God plays out throughout the Bible. It's Old and New Testament. That God asks you to share a little bit of what you have, and if you will, as an act of faith, share a little bit of what you have, just because he asks you to, then he will provide for you in a way that you cannot understand. I've recently been reminded that there are some things that I say and some things that I do that only make sense if you grew up in Arkansas in a Baptist church, right? And what I'm about to say is one of those things. And then maybe your English is not your first language, or you didn't grow up in the Southeast U.S., or you didn't grow up in a Baptist church, and I'm about to say something that I want to explain it first. Okay? So if I say something about, or somebody says something about stepping on my toes, what that means is that you say something that is so personal and so applicable to your situation that I'm getting really close to you in what I'm saying. I'm so close that I'm stepping on your toes, okay? If we want to take it even a step further, and I'm not just so close I'm stepping on your toes, but I'm getting up in your face with the thing that I'm saying. It's really personal, and it's like I heard what you said in the car, and now addressing it specifically, then you might say that I'm kicking your shins, okay? So when I say what I'm about to say and say that I might be kicking some of your shins right now, what I'm saying is that I'm going to say something to you that I know is going to feel like I'm speaking directly into your situation. And God has not spoken to me from on high in a little voice. This is as close as God gets to speaking in a Baptist's ear, what I'm about to do right now, okay? I've had not one, but several conversations with people over the last couple of weeks. And some of you are going to feel like that I'm calling you out specifically about this, and I promise you I'm not. I'm calling you out as a group because several of you have said this. And if 5 people have said something to me about something they're struggling with, whether it's a job decision, whether it's a money decision, whether it's a direction of their life decision, if 5 people have said it to me over a course of a couple of weeks, I believe that out of 170 people, there's probably more than 5 that are dealing with it. And when 5 people say, hey, this is a thing that I'm dealing with, and then a sermon that's scheduled weeks in advance comes and coincides with that, I believe it's my responsibility to speak to you on behalf of God and say something. I want you to know that it makes me really uncomfortable to address this. When you say something to me 2 weeks ago, and then God tells me to say this, it makes me uncomfortable. But it's my job to say to you, this is what God is saying to you right now. I want you to know that. But this is what he's saying. I've talked to several of you that feel like say that you feel like God is asking you to do something that you don't want to do. You got money and you're not giving, at least not in the way that you feel like you need to, or you feel like the way that God is asking you to, and you're really struggling with that. And I feel like the thing that God is asking me to say to you is that the pattern he displays over and over is that he asks you to give in the way that he calls you to. And if you will trust him in that, he will provide for you. This is not, hear me, this is not write your pastor a $2,000 check and sow a seed of faith and you're going to be a millionaire. That's not what that is. You write whatever check you want to me, and we'll do whatever we want to do there. But this is not what I'm saying. This woman was provided for, and I'll finish the story for you here in just a minute, but she was provided for daily bread every day. She was not made a millionaire that made her solved our problems for the rest of her life. She was provided for. And this is not about giving any money to me to sow anything. I want you to understand that. But if God is leading you to give generously to Him and you're saying no because you don't think He deserves it, or you feel like that's your money, or whatever reason, and God is pushing on you to take a small step of faith to give something to Him, if you will just trust Him in that, the other side of that is provision in a way that you cannot understand. That doesn't mean multimillionaire status necessarily. Maybe it does. He can do whatever he wants to. That doesn't mean multimillionaire status. But it means providing for you in a way that you can't. But if you choose not to give that to Him, don't expect that money to hang around whenever you choose it over Him. I don't like saying that, but it's the truth. There are some of you that have talked to me about jobs. And this is not a one-person conversation. This is a several people conversation where you feel like you're not able to do what you need to do because of the job. And you feel like God might be pushing you to change directions, and you keep saying, not yet, not now, maybe later. But God keeps saying, I want you to take this step. If you will trust Him in taking this step right now, it seems like a really big step, but maybe it's not that big of a step. If you will trust Him in this, He will provide for you in a way that you can't possibly understand. There's some of you that God is calling to change kind of a direction of your life, from your dreams for your life to His dreams for your life, from your plans for your life to His plans for your life. And you're saying, I really want to let this go. I'm afraid of what will happen if I'll let this go. I'm afraid of what it's going to cost me if I let this go. And I'm telling you that if you will trust Him in this and give Him just this little bit, He's going to provide for you in a way that you cannot possibly imagine. Abraham sent his servant to go find Isaac a wife. He said, please give me someone that will just give me some water and will give my camel some water. And God sent someone that was willing to give and give just a little bit more. Someone willing to give and do just a little bit more work. And that woman was married into the family of promise. I don't know that she always was happy about that, but she was married into the family of promise. When the disciples were sent out with absolutely nothing, what Jesus said is, whatever house you go to, that they allow you to stay there and stay there the whole time. And whatever blessing you receive from God, whatever reward you receive from God, that household will receive. Whoever welcomes a prophet because he's a prophet will receive a prophet's reward. When the woman at the well who didn't want to talk to anybody about her situation, definitely not a Jewish rabbi, when Jesus said, give me a little bit of water to drink, when she gave him a little bit of water to drink, in return, she received the water of life. When God asks you to give a little and you give that little, He gives back far more in return than you could ever possibly imagine. And this woman had a prophet sent across 100 miles through dangerous territory, not for his sake, but for hers, so that God could say, give a little bit, and I will change the course of your life and the course of your eternity. And because she was willing, we're talking about her today. Thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, the jar of flour shall not be spent, and the jug of oil shall not be empty until the day that the Lord sends rain on the earth. And in verse 15, she went and did as Elijah said. And I mean, she's got good reason to. Because what's the alternative? She dies without eating a last meal, right? What if he's just a crazy guy that wanders out of the desert? She dies without eating a last meal. That's the alternative. But think of all the things that she's heard about that God has done. She has heard the stories, because they had all heard the stories about how God carried the Israelites through the wilderness, about how God parted the Red Sea, about how God defeated the most powerful nation in the world in Egypt and crushed the entire army without an opposing army, about how God carried them through the wilderness, about how God defeated all the nations of the promised land, about how God had brought them there. And then more recently than that, I don't know if you know about this or not, God had called down a drought to stop not just the water there as punishment to their nation, but all of them. And they had called out to their gods, and you know what their gods had done about it? Absolutely nothing. And she had tried her gods, and her gods didn't work, and now this man says, try another god, because this is what he said. She had every reason to have faith. And you know what? We do too. We have every reason to believe, because we know about Jesus being sent for us. And yet we don't want to. We're scared. We have every reason to believe, because we've seen what God has done for us in the past, and yet we're scared. She had every reason. And what was the cost to her? Dies without the last meal. She takes the risk and is wrong. Almost no difference. But because she did trust, she and her household ate for many days. The jar of flour was not spent, neither did the jug of oil become empty, according to the word of the Lord that he spoke by Elijah. She did not get rich. She did not become a millionaire. She didn't get a husband the next day. Her life did not change. But let me tell you what did happen. She ate when no one else was eating. And in the next story, her son would die. And because she took a step of faith, a man would be there to raise him from the dead. And because of her exposure to that prophet, she would be confronted with her sin and call out to the God of Israel in faith, and she would be saved and change the course of her eternity. Because she took a step of faith. Jesus kind of mocked the Jews with this in Luke chapter 6. And he brings up this idea that when Elijah was sent to someone, he wasn't sent to any of the widows of Israel, but he was sent to the widow of Sidon in Zarephath. Why was he sent to her? Was it because she was better than everybody else? Was it because she kept the law better? Was it because... Why? We're not given an answer. But I believe it was because when she was given an opportunity to take a step of faith, she did. And God was willing to make that prophet cross 100 miles in a drought through dangerous territory so that when she was given an opportunity to take a step of faith, she could. We don't like to ask for help, and we don't like to ask for help for two reasons. One is pride, and the other is love. I don't want to ask for help because I don't want you to think I can't do it on my own. I don't want to show any weakness to show that I can't handle this. What kind of person wouldn't be able to move 700 pounds of inflatables by themselves? A weakling, that's who. A fool. I don't want to admit that I can't do this on my own. But I also love you. I don't want to bother you with my problems. You got your own problems. I don't want to take up your time with my inability to handle my own problems. If I wasn't such a weak fool, I could do this on my own. And why should you have to waste your time on my inability to handle my own problems? Right? Pride and love stop us from asking for help. But this pride is not the reasonable pride we talked about. The pride of doing a good job. The pride of looking at your kids or your wife or your husband and saying, I'm just proud of them. I'm satisfied in the work that I've done. It's not that. The pride of not being willing to ask for help is a pride that says, I should be able to do this on my own, and I'm unwilling to admit that I can't. See, the very center of our faith, the core of our faith, is the idea that I cannot do this on my own. Jesus had to come and do this for me. In Ephesians chapter 2, verses 8 through 9, it says this, "For by grace you have been saved through faith, and this is not your own doing. It is the gift of God, not a result of works, so that no one may boast." The core of the faith is this, that I am not good enough on my own. I cannot be good enough on my own. I cannot make myself right before God. My inability to do this is the core of my faith. And if I don't accept that, I cannot be saved. But Jesus is good enough to do this for me, and he comes to do this for me. And when I, by faith that he can, cry out to him to do it for me, I am saved by grace, unmerited favor, not by my own works, but by his. In faith, he is saved, and it is not by my own action, but by his. It is not a result of my actions, but by his, so that I have no ability to boast. So how is it that I can believe that to be true, but I'm unwilling to admit that I need help with stuff? When the core of my faith is that I can't do it, but then I refuse to admit that I can't do it, how do these two things work together? How does it work for me to say I can't do this on my own, but I absolutely can do everything on my own? How do I share the gospel with people at work? How do I share the gospel with my neighbors? How do I share the gospel with my family? And then turn around and tell them by my actions that I absolutely can do everything on my own. What reason do they have to believe me when my actions and my words, the words are over here, and my actions don't line up? How much does your pride and your unwillingness to ask for help detract from your words about the gospel? And what does your lack of willingness to ask for help say about what you really believe about yourself and the gospel? Does it say that the only thing you can't do is save yourself, but you can handle everything else? What does it say to the new believers who come along behind you that believe you when you say that you can't do this on your own, but you should be able to handle everything else? And when they look at themselves and they know for a fact they can't handle everything else, but they look at you and you can handle everything else, at least you're telling them that lie. And how much does your pride that says I can handle everything and I'm not willing to ask for help, how much does it harm them? The reason that Elijah was so effective in this story was because he was willing to do something most of us are not. He set aside his pride and he asked for help. And his willingness to ask for help became an avenue for the gospel to this lady. An avenue that most of us will not travel down because it would require us to set aside our pride and long enough to use it for the gospel. But then we use this excuse about love that I don't want to bother anybody with my problems. I love them too much to bother them with my problems. I love them too much. But the thing about love is that love allows love in return. And when you refuse to ask for help, what you do is you restrict anybody else's ability to show you love in return. The only way that my dad knows how to show me any love is by helping. I understand that. As a dad, I understand that. Britt can show love to the kids in a lot of ways that I just really have a hard time with. But I can help. And I'm not the only one that struggles with that. And you wonder why you don't feel love from anybody. You wonder why nobody seems to care about you. You wonder why you don't have any close relationships. And it's because you won't let anybody help you. And the people around you are so limited, they can't figure out any way to show that they love you other than allowing to show love through help. And you won't ask for help. You won't let anybody help you, so you don't get any love because they don't know how else to show you their love. But love will allow love in return. And Elijah said, I will humble myself enough to allow help. I will love enough to allow help in return. And if you use love as the reason you won't let anybody help you, you're not loving. You're being selfish. Let them love you back. Love accepts help now to allow help later. What would have happened if Elijah had just rolled up in this situation and said, you know what? You're obviously in a bad situation, so I'm not going to accept help from you. I'm going to look for a rich person in town, and I'm going to ask them for help, and then I'm going to come back and help you. What position would that have put him in? Would he have lived in her house We didn't get to that, but he moves into her house and he stays with her for the rest of the drought. He stays with her. He eats that meal with her every day. He is there with her to teach her. And when she comes to know the God of Israel, it's because of that exposure, because he accepted help from her at the beginning. But if he'd refused to accept help from her, he would not have been in position to offer her help later. And most of us won't accept help. We only want to offer help. But love accepts now so that we can offer help later. I have church planners that come to me for advice, like, how do I get started? How do I need to do this when I first get there? And one of the first pieces of advice that I offer to them is when they move there, to go around to all their neighbors and ask for something. Ask for something. Ask for help unloading a couch. Ask to borrow a screwdriver. Ask for a recommendation about where to get groceries. Ask for a recommendation on something. Ask for something. Because whenever you ask for help, everybody loves to give help. Nobody wants to take help. And when you allow somebody to help you, you put yourself in a position that they don't feel as weird taking help from you later. And whenever you will put yourself in a position to receive help from them, when you'll humble yourself enough to receive help from them, you put yourself in a position to offer help to them later. Because Elijah received help from her, he was in a position to help her later. And love will not hold their opportunity to help. Love will invest with humility so that love can be helped later. The last thing. Love allows people to work. Love allows God to work through their help and not just your help. Everybody wants God to work through their own help, right? I want God to work through my help. I want to help you, and I want God to work through that because that feels real good. But the way that God worked in this story was not through Elijah's help. The prophet of God did nothing but show up and ask for some food. But the way that God worked was through the prophet of God showing up and being humble enough to allow God to work through her help. The way that God chose to work was to offer her a chance for faith through her ability to step out and help. And how many of those opportunities have you denied people to the pride that says, no one will help me, I will only help others? This whole story is difficult for me because I want to face down danger so other people don't have to. I want to offer help so nobody else is bothered. I want to be the one who takes on that stuff. I don't want anybody else to have to do that. But the example that we're shown here with Elijah, this great man of God, this capital P prophet, is that sometimes what God asks of us is not to take a great step of faith. It's not to make a huge sacrifice. Sometimes what God asks of us is for us to humble ourselves enough to allow someone else to make the sacrifice, to allow someone else to take the step of faith, to allow ourselves to be in the position of weakness and allow someone else to help us. It's annoying and it's difficult, and I don't like it. But God can work through their help as much as he can work through yours. And sometimes he can do it more. I'm sitting here studying for this sermon, writing through it. And I'm talking about all the big game about how we should do this. And Dennis walks in my office. And Dennis says, "What can I get you for lunch?" Nothing. Nothing. No, you can't give me lunch. No, you're not going to spend your money on me. And I looked up at my notes. It was like God was sitting there with his arms crossed, smiling at me. I said, "Okay. Yeah, you can get me lunch." I swear Dennis ran to the truck. And he was so happy to buy me lunch. That bring you joy, Dennis? Linda brought you joy. He's the one that asked. Linda's the one that handed me the lunch, so she should get credit. And I did not want to do that. And I know it's a small thing. But I didn't want them doing that for me. I will meet people for lunch early so I can pay for my own food because I know they're going to want to pay for it for me. I don't like that. But I deny them a blessing that they want. And I watched Dennis run, and I watched the smiles on their faces when they handed that to me, and I allowed them a blessing by accepting help that I didn't want to accept. Think about the impact you can make with the gospel. Think about the impact you can make on the people in this church. Think about the love that you can extend, the way that you can make people feel loved, the way that you can help grow the relationship. Think about the work that God can do if you will humble yourself, let go of your pride, and allow people to love you. Believe the truth of the gospel and accept some help. And trust that God can work through their help as much as he can work through yours. And for those of you who've been called to take that step of faith, I know I'm long. It's all right. I know it's scary. But I think about when my kids were first jumping off the edge of the swimming pool. I'd get so irritated. Like, just jump off the pole. I'm right here. Like, I'm scared. Like, what are you scared of? I'm right here. Like, it's gonna be fun. I promise you. It's like somebody push them off. Like, I'm right here. You're gonna have so much fun, and you're gonna ask to do this. I'm gonna want to stop later because you're gonna have so much fun doing this. I'm going to catch you. I know it looks high. I know it looks scary. I'm right here. You remember that with the kids? And I know it looks scary. And I know you don't know how it's going to go, but he's right there. Take a leap. It's going to be fun. And the other side that you're scared of facing is way better than what you're holding on to. That's 2 sermons. That's enough for today. Would you stand with me? Our Heavenly Father, I'm so grateful that we can trust you. I'm so grateful that what you call us to is not self-sufficiency, but what you call us to is an acknowledgement of our weakness and our need for one another. I'm so grateful that the hallmark of our faith is not a strict adherence to the rules of perfection, but an acknowledgement of our weakness and your sufficiency. And I ask that we would live that out, not just when it comes to the gospel and our eternity, but that we would live that out in our everyday life, that we would love each other enough to allow help, that we would set aside our pride and believe the gospel in every area. And that if you're calling us to take a step of faith, that we would jump and trust your arms to be strong enough to catch us. It's in Jesus' name I pray. Amen.